Gut Health presented by Dr. Dana Dragone. And we have, it's an important topic, and I'm sure today we'll get some excellent insight and tips on how that can help us. And without further ado, I'll turn over the presentation to Dr. Dragone. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if you'd like to use the Q&A chat, you're welcome to do so. At the end, we'll have a little Q&A, and everyone who has questions may type them in there and they'll be acknowledged. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so hello everyone. I am Dr. Dragone, and today we are talking about gut health because the gut is really so important when it comes to your health, but also especially in like functional medicine and more holistic methods. The GI tract is really a big focus of a lot of treatments for things. So your GI tract makes up about 70% of your immune system. It's where your intuition is. It's also where emotions can be felt and where disease can begin and can be healed. So from a functional medicine perspective, we can pretty much look at anything through the lens of the GI tract, which is pretty cool. It's one of my favorite topics personally because I like to combine not only science, but also the spiritual side of health and well-being. And the GI tract is a great place where you can incorporate both very easily. The reason for this being is if you think about like just even our language, like, oh, I have butterflies in my stomach, or I have a gut feeling. Like we use the word gut and stomach and GI tract so much in just like our language to express things. There's also like the chakras and the solar plexus chakra, which is in your GI tract. It's where you can make decisions, really tuning into how things make you feel. You know, does it upset your stomach? Are you excited? So it's kind of like this combination of not only physical health, but your more like spiritual, emotional, psychological health as well kind of happens in the stomach. So some reasons why it's very important to have proper gut health is because not only, you know, do we feel all of our emotions and everything else in our GI tract, but we need it. We need it to survive. So we need to be able to absorb vitamins and minerals and other nutrients from our food through our GI tract. We need to use it to break down that food so that it can be used for energy, you know, to fuel our cells, to fuel our organs, to keep us running as a human being. It also helps us to excrete toxins and other waste from our bodies, and to help maintain hormone balance as well as a functioning immune system. So like I said before, there's 70% of the immune system is in your GI tract. So having an unhealthy gut really leads to a lowered immune system, which leads to all these different diseases down the line. The gut, or the second brain. So your GI tract communicates with your brain, and it can actually influence your mood as well as your health. And there's something called the gut-brain axis, which is basically a two-way communication. The brain regulates digestive activity, but your gut also sends signals to the brain through the vagus nerve to communicate what's going on. And it also changes like your mood, your feelings, and a lot of other things, hormone expression, things like that. So this is super interesting because as I switch to the next slide, I'm just going to give you guys some stats of how connected the brain is to our mood and our behavior. I find this to be, you know, just super cool science. But what they found through some studies, out of 1,641 patients that had GI issues, 84.1% of them also reported anxiety. So it's really high, especially compared to the general population. Out of those same patients with GI issues, 27% also reported being depressed. Again, higher than in the general population. 62% of patients with schizophrenia actually improved with the gluten-free and casein-free diet. So looking at that, that tells us that there's something going on with diseases, specifically like schizophrenia and other mood disorders and personality disorders that can actually be fixed when we address gut health. 31% of patients with celiac disease in this one study actually had major depression disorder compared to 7% in the control. So celiac disease is an intolerance to gluten. It destroys the lining of your GI tract. And most people with celiac disease tend to have a lot of GI upset and GI issues. Whether, they need to adhere to a very strict gluten-free diet. But we're seeing that disruption in GI integrity leads to more episodes of major depression. That same study, 28% of teens with celiac disease had disruptive behavior disorders compared to only 3% in the control. And between 70 and 90% of patients who have IBS also seek treatment for mood and anxiety disorders. So we can see there's another statistic as well that's like 46% of patients who have IBS also have panic disorder. So there's this big connection between how our gut how is healing, how our gut health is able to break down the nutrients that we're getting from our diet, what we're eating, how that's affecting our gut health, and how it's affecting our mood. It's all connected, which is pretty cool. So besides mood, which we kind of just talked about, your GI tract also regulates a lot of other things. So it regulates allergies, it regulates depression, diabetes, your food choices. This is a really interesting one. IBS, metabolism. IBS, for those of you that don't know, is irritable bowel syndrome, which is mostly like your bowel movements and things like that, and any bloating or gas. Obesity, pain, even your nervous system. So going to food choices, talking about this a little bit, I'm explaining why it's so interesting, is that it's believed that your microbiome, which is all the bacteria that live inside your GI tract, they actually influence what you eat and your food choices. So for example, if you have an unhealthy microbiome, one that you've been fueling with Doritos, chocolate chip cookies, candies, whatever it is, it's actually going to influence you to want more of those foods because that's what is feeding it. So those microbiome, which we have about 3 times as many cells in our microbiome, or as many bacteria in our microbiome as we do cells in our body. So you're actually more made up of your microbiome than you are human cells, which is pretty interesting. But these little bacteria are saying, we really like Doritos, and this is what makes us thrive. So we want you to eat more Doritos so that we can reproduce and grow and take over. And that's why it's really important to make sure you have this healthy microbiome, because as you change your diet, and say you were to start eating all whole foods, cutting out all the processed foods, you're going to still crave those processed foods for a while until your microbiome switches, and the bacteria that feeds off of the healthy things like whole fruits, vegetables, quality protein, those are going to start influencing your food choices. So you'll typically see someone who eats healthy doesn't necessarily crave too many junky foods all the time, whereas someone who eats really junky foods is going to crave those foods more because their microbiome is influencing what they're going to eat. Deborah, do you have a question? No? If you do, you can unmute yourself and ask it. If not, it's okay. You can always put it in the chat as well. So that's really interesting, the food choices part of it. Also going to like obesity. Obviously, our food choices play a role in that, but when we have inflammation in the GI tract, it actually releases different cytokines, which are just these inflammatory markers in your body, that go through the bloodstream. They can cause pain, they can influence your hormones and affect your hormones, which then in turn affect your obesity. So for example, if you have inflammation or damage happening to your thyroid and your thyroid slows down, that is going to result in some weight gain. other things as well. You know, if you have a lot of sugar in your diet and a lot of high fats in your diet, and it starts to wear away at your pancreas, you're going to develop things like diabetes, and your microbiome is going to influence that, as well as the inflammation, which is going to make things worse. How long does it take for your microbiome to switch is a question that I just got in. So again, there's not a specific answer. I can't tell you a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But typically when we're working with different GI tract healing modalities, such as like a elimination diet or something along those lines, we usually like to say about 6 months is when we start to really see big changes. I don't think there's been any studies that really can tell you like your microbiome will switch right away, because it's such a fluctuating thing. But over time, the more healthy foods that you eat, the more healthy foods you incorporate, the more you're going to be able to starve the bad bacteria and grow the good bacteria. Hopefully that answered that. Okay, so, whoops. Going back to things like allergies. This one is also really interesting. So your GI tract regulates allergies because it all has to do with like inflammation. And when you have an impaired GI tract, you can become more sensitive to different proteins and different foods. The next slide, I'm going to talk about leaky gut. So I'm going to hold my demonstration for that slide, but it pairs into this well. They've also, in some studies have been done where we've seen children who were born through C-section have a greater increase of like asthma or allergies, because vaginal birth will actually provide more diverse microbiome to the baby. And for whatever reason, it does help with allergies. So we do know that there's a connection there. So if we move on to leaky gut, this is a term that's used so much, and it describes like pretty much what is an otherwise like unknown GI condition. Like sometimes you'll hear like IBS, or people will have all these issues. Maybe they do a food sensitivity test and everything they eat comes up as like a yellow or a red food, meaning like you're somewhat sensitive to it. And that's usually just a sign of leaky gut. It doesn't mean that you're allergic to these foods. You might not necessarily be sensitive to them all the time. But what happens with leaky gut is, if you can see my fingers here, your GI tract normally has a very tight barrier. And each of these cells, like pretend each of my fingers is a cell, is connected to the other one through something called tight junctions. And those keep it really tight. Only proteins and nutrients that are supposed to go through are allowed to go through, and it's controlled. But as we increase with inflammation, we start to get these gaps. And now proteins that are bigger, that should have been broken down more, or things that normally would not go through the GI tract into the bloodstream, are kind of getting leaked through. And these foreign bodies or foreign particles or proteins that are in the GI tract cause an immune response. Your body senses them and says, oh my gosh, I don't know what you are. You're not supposed to be here. I must attack you. So even if it's something like chicken, which maybe you eat chicken every day, never has bothered you before, but now you're having some GI issues, and you go do a sensitivity test and it tells you that you're sensitive to chicken, it might not necessarily be that you're actually sensitive to chicken. It could just be that you have this inflammation. So every time you eat chicken, little bits of that protein is actually going through the GI tract and ending up where it shouldn't be. And this inflammation is usually due to things like poor lifestyle choices, bad diets, toxin exposures, things like that, not exercising, all those things that we know are bad for us. And the interesting thing with leaky gut is that it can result in a variety of symptoms, not just the ones isolated in the GI tract. So, for example, it can be things like autoimmune diseases, migraines, even autism. We talked about food sensitivities, a lot of skin conditions, brain fog, chronic fatigue, allergies. I remember working with one of my professors during my doctorate, and she was a big advocate for, if you have a lot of seasonal allergies, it's a good indicator that your GI tract is unhealthy. I have another question coming in that says, what is the difference between leaky gut and dysbiosis? So leaky gut is actually the act of things leaking through your GI tract and particles kind of coming through, and there ends up being this immune response and inflammation triggered. Dysbiosis is just the term for your microbiome. All the bacteria are not as healthy as they should be. The term dysbiosis can be a little bit confusing because there's not like one specific GI tract microbiome that's perfect for everyone. And really what we're looking at is what is going on down the line, like downstream, what issues are you having? And could they be related to a poor, GI tract microbiome, which usually they are. But for example, if you test the GI tract of a vegan who's super healthy and someone who's on keto diet who's super healthy, they're going to have totally different microbiomes, and they're still going to be healthy individuals with no GI issues. So does that kind of make sense? Hopefully. It's really just depends on what symptoms are popping up and whether or not they can be attributed to some type of issue in the gut microbiome, whether it's bad bacteria, yeast, overgrowth, things like that. So back to leaky gut. Really, you see this alongside a lot of like chronic diseases as well because of the inflammatory portion of it. We see things like, we see it with celiac disease, we see it with type 1 diabetes. There is a protein in gluten that is called zonulin, and it actually affects those tight junctions that I told you about that kind of link each cell to each other. And what they found is that the zonulin will loosen those tight junctions and actually increase the inflammation and intestinal permeability. So that's why if you do go see some type of like functional nutrition practitioner, they're probably going to recommend that you take out gluten as one of the first and foremost things to help heal your GI tract. Other than that, it's mostly just inflammation, and there's no test for leaky gut. But when you do those food allergy testing or those food sensitivity testings, that typically, if you have, a ton of things that you eat every day showing up that you're sensitive to, that typically means that you have leaky gut, and that's a pretty good indicator of it. So some signs of an unhealthy or leaky gut, we did briefly talk about this before, but really we can see things like depression, mood swings, fatigue, even addiction, poor memory, or that like brain fog or difficulty concentrating, confusion, skin rashes. Skin rashes are a big one. You'll see a lot of otherwise unknown, like undiagnosed skin rashes popping up in people, and it typically is a sign of leaky gut or some type of food sensitivity. This is because that immune response that I told you about that happens in the bloodstream, it's just like a generalized response. It kind of shows up wherever it's going to show up. So a lot of times it's in the skin. You'll see a lot of bloating or discomfort after eating certain foods. And you'll also see a lot of food or environmental sensitivities. So if, normally your allergies are not that bad, and this spring comes around and all of a sudden you're just miserable, it's a good idea to take a peek at your diet and see what you've been eating and see if there's any GI issues going on associated with it. So getting to the importance of nutrition is that diet is the most powerful influence on gut microbiota and health. So you can take medications, you can take supplements, you can take probiotics, but the thing that's going to matter the most is diet. And the reason for this is because, all of those like pills and supplements are more of a temporary fix. They're not a long-term solution. So if you eat donuts on the regular, but take a probiotic, your gut microbiome is still going to be that of the donuts that you're eating every single day. The probiotic might help for maybe an hour, maybe a day, not even, maybe 12 hours. But it's not going to be enough to change your microbiome. And what you eat influences your GI tract bacteria, and this has an effect on all areas of your body, including your brain, your liver, your kidneys, your thyroid, any hormone production, any inflammation, your weight, your immune system, and your energy level. So very important. The food you eat, I love this quote, can be either the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. So when we're eating, it's important to remember, one Dorito is not going to kill you, right? But one Dorito every day over the course of 30 years is gonna not be so good for your health. You're eating a lot of processed, corn, that's inflammatory. There's what else? Fake cheese, chemicals, that red dye 40, like all that stuff, not good for us. So thinking about that in terms of what are your long-term patterns with your food, and how can you make those long-term decisions and the decisions of what you eat every single day the healthiest as they can be. Some other factors that affect gut health, I kind of just threw this in here to show you guys how much really, can actually go into the health of your GI tract. But it's things like diet, it's things like environmental toxins. Breastfeeding can actually have a huge difference in the microbiome because of the bacteria in breast milk, which helps to develop a baby's GI tract. Children who aren't breastfed also have an increased risk of asthma. Things like your acne can all be a downstream factor of some gut issues. And antibiotics and medication are a big one. Anytime you take antibiotics, you're not just cutting out the bad bacteria, you're cutting out all the good bacteria as well, and you're basically having to start over. Any type of like skin issue, rosacea, things like that are usually a sign of an unhealthy GI tract. We've got sleep issues. I have another slide coming up about just how important gut health is with sleep. Things like exercise, anxiety, depression, even your brain. All of the hormones that get produced in your gut, and I told you there's like that two-way communication between your gut and your brain. It really does affect your brain, and we see a lot of GI issues in people with Parkinson's disease and people with Alzheimer's because it's all connected. Increased cortisol, which is like your stress hormone, that increases inflammation. It causes some of those leaky gut type of symptoms, all these things. So here's the slide about gut health and how it affects sleep. So basically, like, your eyes contain these light receptors, and they tell the hypothalamus to increase or decrease serotonin production based on what time it is during the day. Right? We want to increase serotonin when we need it, and then we want to be able to decrease it when we don't need it as much. And serotonin actually can be converted into melatonin. So this stimulates the brain to have a good night's sleep. You might have heard of people who don't sleep very well taking melatonin at night, and that's because it helps to put us to bed. It helps with our circadian rhythm. So lifestyle choices can either decrease the amount of serotonin produced by the microbiome or increase it. And the hypothalamus controls the circadian rhythm, serotonin, hormones, and much more. So as the microbiome sends signals to stimulate the production of serotonin, it's affecting our hypothalamus. And the microbiome, so about 95% of serotonin is actually found in the gut. There's some discrepancy. It's not believed that it crosses the gut-brain barrier, but there's precursors, meaning, like, for example, 5-HTP is a precursor of serotonin. And some of these upstream metabolites can cross the blood-brain barrier and affect our sleep cycles. If we have an impaired gut integrity and we're not producing enough serotonin, then we're not going to be able to make enough melatonin to help us fall asleep. It's also, you can see this too in people who have, like, they'll be tired in the middle of the day, and then all of a sudden, like 7 or 8 o'clock at night will hit and they're wired. This is a cortisol issue, which can be related back to stress. and it affects our GI tract and causes some havoc there. So we're not able to produce enough melatonin to overcome the cortisol and help us fall asleep. It's the opposite effect. We end up shooting up our cortisol and then we're awake all night. So the GI tract really is important in regards to how we sleep and all of our hormone and neurotransmitter productions. So tips to improve gut health. Now that we've gone through and understood the importance of it, right? I will answer this question in a second. But yeah, I'm gonna go through this slide and I'll answer that. So tips to improve gut health. So eat a variety of fruits, vegetables, and whole foods. You've heard this your whole life. We know what to do. It's just a matter of doing it. But you can also use prebiotics and probiotics to restore some healthy microbiome. You can eat anti-inflammatory foods to help reduce any inflammation and heal the GI tract. Also things like reducing your stress through mindfulness, exercise, breathing techniques, and even spending time outdoors. All of those calm our nervous system, can reduce our cortisol, which ultimately is going to reduce inflammation and improve the GI tract. And we also can do things like turning off electronics at night so that we get a good night's sleep, because as we talked about in the last slide, we do have those receptors in our eyes that respond to light. So when we're on our computers and our cell phones and our TVs late at night, our eyes are getting confused. They're thinking that it's daylight and they're going to reduce the production of serotonin. And that means we're not going to have the melatonin produced to help us go to sleep. So making sure that you either, avoid the electronics or putting them on what is it called? There's like specific apps or like night mode that changes the coloring. So it's not blue light, it's red light, which is similar more to like the sunset light. Next, we have reducing your allergen exposure. So anytime you are allergic to something, or if you're very sensitive to certain foods or smells or things like that, that's going to cause an immune response. So if there's foods that maybe don't sit so well with you, or you live in a place that's got a lot of dust or mold or things like that, we want to reduce those exposures so that we don't have this immune response that causes all the inflammation. You can exercise daily to reduce stress and also help boost the immune system. Another one is listening to music. Singing and dancing can actually improve that vagus nerve function, so that'll help with the communication between your brain and your GI tract. You can eliminate refined sugars and processed carbs. Any type of refined sugar is not going to be good for you. Fruit is not a refined sugar. That is a complex carbohydrate. That is what we want to have in our diets. But things like table sugar or brown sugar, anything, high fructose corn syrup, that kind of stuff, we want to eliminate. Avoid taking medications, especially over-the-counter pain relievers, things like Advil, Tylenol, because that can cause damage in the GI tract. Birth control, I believe, also causes damage, and so does steroids. So if you're on these things long term, you can really be doing a lot of damage to your GI tract. And then, of course, avoid overconsumption of alcohol, because I see we have a question over here that says, is it true to say that once the diet is, let's see, no, where is the other question? What causes stomach ulcers, bleeding, or not, please? So to kind of go along with this, a lot of times stomach ulcers can be caused by excess alcohol consumption. It can be caused by stress. There's also a bacteria called H. pylori that can cause stomach ulcers. So typically when we see stomach ulcers, if you have a doctor who's more functional based, they will run a test for H. pylori. And if you have that bacteria, you'll be given antibiotics and other things to get rid of that. As well as bleeding, it really just depends on the depth of the ulcer, how big it is, how bad it is, and if it's continuously being triggered or if it's on the mend. So to answer, there's another one over here that said probiotics and prebiotics. Yes, I can go over brands as well, but I love to do everything through food. So one of the biggest things is incorporating like prebiotics, for those of you that don't know, are foods that help feed your microbiome. Probiotics are foods that have bacteria in them, okay? So some good prebiotic foods that'll help feed the good bacteria in your GI tract are things like onions, bananas, chicory is great, soybeans, eggplant, honey, green tea, asparagus, leeks, legumes, peas, garlic. Pretty much any type of fruit or vegetable, like whole fruit or whole vegetable, is going to be a great prebiotic food because it has these fibers in it that our microbiome likes to feed off of. As for probiotic foods, these are things that have bacteria in them. It's important when you purchase these that you look at how they were made. So for example, the pickles that you buy in the store probably are not raw. Whereas if you go to the farmer's market and find the guy who actually like ferments his own pickles, those are going to be raw pickles. It's the same thing with sauerkraut, kimchi, even yogurt. A lot of our processed yogurts don't actually have as many bacteria in them as we would like them to have. So, you know, paying attention to where you're getting things from. Same thing with the kombucha. Kombucha is great. It's better to find a homemade one. A lot of the store-bought brands have a ton of sugar in them. And raw vinegar is good as well. So this is like an apple cider vinegar. You can actually buy apple cider vinegar with the mother still in it. So it'll have like a little bit of like cloudy stuff at the bottom. And that's great. You know, you can use that in salad dressings. You can use that in your cooking and things like that, which will have a lot of GI benefits. So let me just see what these questions are. Okay, so do you see patients or do you know a functional medicine practice you can recommend? I do see patients. The last page has my email and I think my Instagram on it. So I will share that with you at the end. What prebiotic and which probiotic would you recommend? So prebiotics, 100% always go with the food. There's no, in my opinion, it's silly to buy a prebiotic when you can just eat healthy, whole fruits and vegetables. As for probiotics, you always want to look at if it's refrigerated or not. It should be refrigerated. Claire Labs is a great probiotic brand. There's all different types for different things, but that is a really good brand. Garden of Life is also great as well. So that's another refrigerated probiotic, and they make a ton of different products, such as like they have one that's specific for mood boosting. They have one specific for females, one specific for the urinary tract if you're someone who gets chronic UTIs. Some that are specific to the colon if you get very bloated. So you can kind of look at that and see, you know, what's going to be best for you, because not all probiotics are the same. There's thousands of different bacteria, like strands, that could be in a probiotic, and it really depends on your specific issue to see which one is going to be best for you. But either Claire Labs, and I'll type this in the chat, Claire Labs or Garden of Life are the two that I usually purchase, and you can purchase those at any like health food store. I usually use Full Script. I think that's a practitioner only, but if anyone really needs them, they can let me know, but it's called fullscript.com, and I could set you up with an account for that as like a patient. But usually any type of like whole food store or like holistic or vitamin store, you should be able to find Claire Labs and Garden of Life. If you're local, I know Provisions has some of them, and actually Claire is spelled like this, sorry. And whatever the like Wild by Nature, Nature's something, Nature's, I don't remember what the store is, but it's a vitamin store, and those are typically there. So let's see. What is considered overconsumption of alcohol? A glass of wine with dinner would be okay so overconsumption is when there's like binge drinking multiple nights a week. Typical consumption, the standards, like if you were to look them up, are a glass of alcohol, like a beverage for females a night, and then 2 for males a night. And, wine can be great, especially if you're getting like an organic wine, because it does actually have like those bacteria in it. When you're doing things like a rum and Coke, that's probably not going to be that helpful because, it's a lot of sugar and, Coca-Cola is not good for us. So really paying attention to your alcohol, what you're drinking, being particular with it, and trying to drink things like a red wine that does have some benefits would be best. Okay, so another question is it true to say that once the diet is improved, leaky gut can be reversed? So yes, I am a firm believer that if you heal your GI tract, you heal your GI tract, you're going to see a lot of different differences in your health. You might not necessarily be like 100% healed, because I don't think it's realistic for someone to have the perfect GI tract, especially in this society that we live in where we're surrounded by toxins. But you can heal it to where you're not symptomatic anymore, if that makes sense to you. And then how important is it to take digestive enzymes to improve gut health? So I'm going to answer this now too, but as we get into the next two slides, I do have some supplements, and one of them is digestive enzymes. So digestive enzymes are great, especially if you are, excuse me, if you're someone who goes to the bathroom and when you have a stool, you notice a little bit of like undigested foods in there. And that means that you're not fully able to digest your foods with just your GI tract alone. And digestive enzymes can really help with like bloating and getting your food digested and broken down so that you can use it, and just overall improving the function of the GI tract. You can also take them in between meals, and that will help boost your immune function. So I think digestive enzymes are a great option. They're not necessarily like you have to have them if you want to improve your gut health. There's other ways to improve your gut health, but they aren't a bad choice. And so this question is, the world of probiotics can be confusing. Have scientists studied specific strains or brands that are helpful for leaky gut or overall gut health? And the way that I'm going to answer this is, yes, there is so much research on probiotics, but there is no definitive answer. So you can find a ton of articles saying probiotics are the best thing ever. You can use them to boost your moods. You can use them to improve your gut health. You can use them to regulate your bowel movements, all these things. And then you can find probably the same amount of articles that say they're useless. They don't actually work. They don't make it through the stomach acid. So, why bother wasting your money on them when they just get broken down in the stomach and don't even make it to the GI tract, like the lower GI tract where they're needed. And there even was an article published probably like 2-3 years ago now that said that they were dangerous and don't take them because they can mess up your GI tract and then you can't get it back to normal because you're introducing all these different bacteria. So my take on it is, if there's someone who is struggling with a particular issue, we know that there are specific strains of bacteria that can help with certain issues. For example, with like mood disorders, there are some bacteria that can be very beneficial for that. Also for C. diff. C. difficile is a disease that it's a bacteria infection that causes a lot of diarrhea. It can be very damaging. People usually end up in the hospital for it. There is specific strains of bacteria and specific probiotics that actually are very beneficial for C. difficile and can reverse that disease. So it just depends on kind of like what we're going for. For leaky gut or overall gut health, it's probably going to be more of just a broad spectrum, because there's not, unless you have leaky gut with like a mood issue or leaky gut with C. diff or skin rashes or whatever else it is, a broad spectrum is probably going to be the best if you're just looking for like overall gut health. And the last question, why can't we see the info you typed in the chat? I'm not sure. Oh, that's why. Here we go. How about this? We all see it now? Hopefully. Yes. Okay, great. Yes, that was my fault. I sent it to not everyone. Okay, so moving on from probiotics, but some other GI healing foods, things that are good to incorporate into your diet include bone broth. Bone broth is one of the most healing things that you can consume. If you do not eat animals or bone broth, disgusts you or creeps you out or whatever. Another really good option is just making your own broth with vegetable scraps. So for example, you can throw in things like onion, including the skin of the onion. It actually has a lot of benefits that can be extracted. Garlic, carrots, celery, parsley, bay leaf, ginger, turmeric, all of these things are anti-inflammatory. They're so healing. And you just simmer them for hours until it's all mush, strain it. And now you have this really delicious bone or vegetable broth that is full of nutrients and vitamins and things that are going to help heal the GI tract. Okra is another food. If you've ever had okra, it's kind of got this like slimy texture to it. It helps to actually coat the GI tract with that mucus, and it's beneficial and protective. Slippery elm tea as well as licorice tea are also great for the GI tract. Mushrooms have a ton of benefits, all different types of mushrooms. Papaya is great for digestion, especially the seeds. We've got burdock root. Again, this is really healing to the GI tract. So is celery juice. You might have heard like the crazy celery juice trend, but there is a reason why so many people do it, and that's because it does work. Salmon has healthy fats that are great for rebuilding the cells in the GI tract. Aloe vera is something you don't want to take long term, but can be really helpful if you are having some GI issues or having some bloating and constipation. It can help you have a bowel movement, as well as olive oil and ginger. Ginger is a really helpful healing anti-inflammatory. That's great for settling, nausea, settling bloating. It also can help reduce pain, so it's a really good option to have. This question is black licorice good to eat in moderation? So licorice is a candy, and unfortunately, most brands of licorice barely have any of the actual like licorice herb in it, if any at all. So not necessarily. It'd be better to drink something like a licorice tea or taking it as a supplement, which we'll talk about in a second. So for the supplement wise, this is our last slide. And then if anyone else has any other questions, I will be happy to answer them. But supplements that help the gut health are vitamin D3 is an immune booster. So really important, especially if you live in northern climates where you have that changing of seasons to winter. We don't typically get outside enough, or the sun's not strong enough during the winter months, and we can get very depleted in vitamin D. So making sure that your levels are up, and if they're low, to supplement with D3. L-glutamine is another really great supplement. This is a amino acid, and the GI tract actually uses it as fuel. So L-glutamine is one of the most widely recommended, I would say, like supplements to help heal the GI tract and help heal leaky gut. Zinc carnosine is great as well. We've got our probiotics that we just talked about, the digestive enzymes that we kind of just talked about. Quercetin is another one, can really help reduce inflammation and improve the GI tract. Triphala is one of my personal favorites. Not only does it help to heal the GI tract, but it also helps to stimulate bowel movements in a very gentle and safe way. So it's better. I always recommend Triphala over things like Colace or what's the other one that's out there? Senna. Those types of bowel movement stimulators. I would rather use a Triphala, which is all natural and has added benefits. Plus, it's not habit forming. A lot of people who deal with constipation, they start taking some laxatives and then they can't stop, because when they stop, now they can't have a bowel movement at all on their own. Triphala doesn't do that, which is really great. Vitamin C is also good. And deglycerized licorice. So this is very important. If you do take licorice as a supplement, you want to make sure it's deglycerized. It'll be called DGL licorice. And the reason for this is because there is a compound in licorice called it's like glyceria. I'm not sure exactly how it's said, pronounced, but it can increase blood pressure and actually cause like high blood pressure, heart attacks, things like that. So you really want to make sure that you get the deglycerized version. So that's it for the supplements. My website is here. I will type my email in the chat since it's not on here. I thought it was, but okay, so there's my email. And going back to these questions, why shouldn't you drink aloe vera long term? Aloe vera can be very harsh on the GI tract. It does help to stimulate a bowel movement, and it can be very, it loosens things up if you think of like the gel of aloe vera, but it can be a little bit harsh and it can actually dry you out. So it's important, you don't want to take it long term. You can take it when you need it. And yeah, it shouldn't be used for more than like a week or two at a time. What forms of ginger, excuse me, honestly, any fresh ginger is going to be the best and most potent. You can also do, dry ginger. You can do the pickled ginger, like what you get with sushi a lot. Those are all great. And this says, I enjoy aloe vera drinks with low sugar content. Can I drink this daily? If not, how often would you recommend to consume aloe vera? So I would say if it's a drink and there's other things in there, like if it's partly juice and the aloe vera content is not like a super high, then it's probably fine to drink daily. But if it's like a shot of aloe vera, just straight aloe vera, and there's no like added juice or whatever else to make it really a drink, then you might not want to consume it daily, maybe like once a week. But usually the drinks that are like at the store are fine to drink daily. Yes, I drank pure aloe vera for a month and got huge spots on my neck. Yeah. It's a little bit harsh and you can have, some symptoms like that, and it can too much can make your GI tract health worse. It's like where there's that fine dosing, like a little bit is okay, but too much is turning like poison at that point. And what about Align for probiotics? So Align is okay. It's very generic. It's, some people have had really great results with Align, and that's fine. If you feel like it's doing something for you and you've noticed a difference, then keep taking it. If not, there's definitely brands that I would prefer a little bit more, such as the Garden of Life or the Claire Labs. But again, I've heard, good things about it. It's not that it's a terrible product. I just think there's definitely higher quality products out there. But it is a really good generic option that the price point is not crazy high as well. So that's good. Does anyone else have any other questions? No.
I see Galaxy S10. Would you like to ask your question? I can unmute you if you'd like. And we have a hand raised from Deborah. If you'd like to ask your question, you're welcome to do so.
I didn't realize I had my hand raised. Apologies. And I'm not seeing how the icon to put it down.
Oh, no problem. We'll take care of that.
Oh, I see it in lower hand. Okay. Did I do it? Is it down?
You did. Perfect.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
No problem. I do have a question in the Q&A. Do you have other classes coming up? I do. I believe we're doing, what's the next one? Intermittent fasting?
Yes, we have intermittent fasting coming up. And that is on the, let me just make sure it's of the date on that. And we also have All About Herbs, which is going to be we're going to do all about herbs as a hybrid program, but if you're in East Hampton and you come in person, Dana's going to have, you're going to have some herbs for people to take, I think, from
Yeah.
your garden.
Yep.
Okay, so intermittent fasting, that is Monday, September 13th, from 12 to 1 p.m. And you're welcome to sign up for that. And we have all about herbs from 12 to 1 p.m. on Tuesday, September 14th. And if you can make it in person, you get to sample some of the herbs from Dana's garden. If not, we'll see you on Zoom. We're going to do that as a hybrid. And just a few, couple more, there's a few more questions
Yep.
in there.
So what is the best probiotic for IBS-D? I really like for any type of IBS, the Claire Labs Factor 4. So I'll write that down for you. This is a really good probiotic in general, and it does have like a whole ton of options just for any type of IBS. Not necessarily specific for D, but it will help with that as well, because it's just a very good generic one. That's very high quality. My website is coming up weird. I don't know. I will have to check on that in the back end of my website. But that is on my website, so I will look up what's going on, and you guys can try it again, and if I can fix it on the back end, I will. What else do we have here? Okay, what about a digestive system that seems to work too quickly? So a bowel movement soon after each meal. I don't think that that's unhealthy. I am a big fan of like multiple bowel movements a day. So if you look up the like what is normal for bowel movements, it could be 1 to 3 bowel movements every 1 to 3 days, which to me is crazy. If I was having 1 bowel movement every 3 days, I'd be very, very concerned, right? Because that just means you're holding on to all these toxins and chemicals and things that you need to get out and waste that you need to get out. And you're holding on to it for days at a time, which means that it gets reabsorbed into your body. And that's where we see a lot of things like cancer and stuff like that. So I'm a big fan of 3 bowel movements a day. It's not so much the frequency of them, but looking at their consistency. So is it very loose? Then you might have an issue with like not digesting your food as much, something where the enzymes would come in handy. It also could be if it's like really hard and like little pellets, you need some more fluids in your diet, some more fiber. But I'd be more concerned with the texture than the frequency, if that helps at all. I will send these slides to Steven and he can distribute them to you guys. And then let's see.
The website, www.rootwellnessco altogether.com. Yeah, I just checked it. It's perfect. You might have had an extra dot in there or something shuffled because computer sometimes is a little bit, but it works very good.
Great. And then what do you know about colonics is another question. Oh, what do I think about colonics? So colonics can be useful. I wouldn't do them more than like 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. But you don't want to, with colonics, you don't want to completely strip your GI tract, right? Especially that lower GI tract. Some of them, depending on what you're using, can be very harsh and can actually wear away at the lining of your GI tract and mess with your microbiome. But they can be really beneficial to help clear people out. And as long as you're not overusing it, they can be very powerful and great. I would say maybe every 3 months or so. I wouldn't do much more frequently than that. Excuse me. And do you have a recommendation for IBS-C? This is the last question I'm seeing. I would say the same thing. Clarebiotics or Claire Labs, the Factor 4 is really great for any type of IBS. It is a very good probiotic. That is probably my biggest recommendation for people. If you need more fluids, can it be sparkling water? Yeah, so there's a debate. I'm a huge fan of seltzer, so like I probably am a little bit biased in my answer because some people will say like the CO2 can actually dehydrate you. Whereas others are like, no, it's fine. Water is water kind of thing. But if you need more fluids, yeah, sparkling water is great. Just make sure there's not a ton of like additives in it. So what I usually do is I bought myself a soda stream and I make my own seltzer now. So I can use my like good, healthy, filtered water that I have at my house. You just want to avoid things that have like natural flavors, or if it's like colored, like those ice sparkling waters, those can be pretty toxic. If you need flavor, you can always add some fruit to it. That's going to be the healthiest option. But I'm a fan of sparkling water, so I say go for it.
Excellent presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for zooming in today. It looks like we have one last question on digestive health with the gallbladder.
Yeah, so the gallbladder is a very important component of digesting fat. So if your gallbladder is not working that well, the best thing to do would be to go on a very low fat diet and try that for a while. Give your gallbladder some rest. There's been things like, I think there's something called the gallbladder cleanse, and it tells you to drink like a cup of olive oil or something ridiculous like that. Do not do that. Do not do that at all. You can use digestive enzymes to help break down your foods and kind of relieve the work that your gallbladder has to do. But really just a very strict low fat diet. So think like steaming all of your vegetables, reducing your meat as much as possible, really just kind of surviving off fruits and vegetables for like a month should help to get that back on track. And then when you go to eat fat again, really going very, very slowly and starting with things like avocado and nuts before you eat anything that's like fried or anything like cheese or pizza or something like that. Really starting with like the whole food fats. And your doctor suggested you remove your gallbladder. Yeah, most doctors will, because it's not like you can function perfectly fine without that organ. It's basically just a storage area for bile, which is what breaks down fat, but your liver is the one that actually produces the bile. So a lot of doctors will say right away, like, yeah, just remove it because you don't really need it. Plus they get a lot of money when they do surgery. But my take is if you don't need to remove it and you can kind of give yourself, it depends on how much pain you're in, but if you can really give yourself like 3 to 4 weeks of eating a very low fat diet and seeing if it improves at all, then you might not need to remove it. If you have a really bad infection or if you have a ton of gallstones or something else going on, then removal might be best. But usually if it's just like a sluggish gallbladder and it's causing a little bit of pain, but there's no active infection, diet should be able to fix it. All right.
Thank you very much. We'll see everybody again on intermittent fasting on the September 13th. There's still room. And if anyone would like to check out the talk on herbs, that'll be in person at the library as well as on Zoom. It's a hybrid event, and we'll see you on the 14th. And thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you, everyone.